Hi, and welcome to this week's Tips for AI Trailblazers. Today, we're going to focus a little bit on prompting 101. Obviously, we launched our newsletter for Demystify last week and heard some feedback that some of it might be a little too technical. And so we wanted to go this week to more of a basics tip on how to get the most out of your AI tools you're using. Now, this does not matter if you're utilizing ChatGPT, Opus, Llama. These tips will help you be successful in getting what you need out of AI. So when we talk about prompting, prompting is the act of sending a question or a request to an AI foundational model. And there's some basic tips that we like to use to really get the best out of our AI models and reducing the amount of number of revisions that are needed. First and foremost, be specific and detailed. The more specific and detailed you can be about the requests that you're making, the better responses you'll get. The second is make sure you're stating your objective. What is the goal of your prompt? What is the output that you're looking for? And when we talk about that output, make sure you're being really specific about the format of that output. Do you want it in a list, a summary? How do you want that formatted so it makes sure it meets the expectations of a structured detail that you need? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? Things of that nature. Also, make sure you're providing context. One of the things I think is really important, and I hear it all the time, is that the AI doesn't sound like them. It doesn't sound like the person that they are and how they would normally communicate. One thing I oftentimes recommend is have a couple of your writing samples, use AI to write a brand voice guidelines, and use that as context for your prompts to ensure that it is kind of really helping you get what you need. And finally, iterate and refine. I think those individuals who are most successful with using AI are those who are pretty resilient and are used to iterating and trying new technologies on a regular basis. So these are just some few high-level tips on how to get the most out of your AI tools utilizing prompting. And one thing I always like to share is, this idea of this, not that. So one thing, when I was in the 90s, right, those books, try this food and not that. But when we talk about context being super key and making sure we're getting the most out of it, instead of saying, write an email to a prospect, give them a lot more information. Draft an email to a potential prospect whose name is Sarah. Sarah is a growing startup company with about this many employees looking to leverage X, Y, and Z for their new sales. So this kind of shows you how you expand that context and how you get so much more out of these tools. The second is specify the tone, right? This way you can match the tone of your AI to ensure that it sounds either like you or the person that you're working with, right? So if you're using it from a business sales perspective, one thing times I will use is their mission, values, and guidelines on their website to make sure that the tone that I'm speaking to them in is something they will well receive and something they really feel will have alignment from the getting. So instead of saying draft an email to a long-term client about our new product, we want to make sure we're not only saying draft a friendly, warm email to our long-term client, and it's actually a social media client. So we're adding a little bit more context. Their name is John, and we want to introduce this new product, and it's our CRM product, right? So providing that little bit more of context helps you get the best results. And then finally, when you're doing these things, make sure you're experimenting with your prompts. I found I always like to take on the persona of X or Y. And sometimes I found if I ask it to take on the persona of an expert AI instructor or a rocket scientist, sometimes I get much better answers than if I kind of leave that piece out. So really try to utilize different prompts to see how you can get the best things out of the tools that you're using. And once you do, save them. So in this one, you might have two. Instead of saying, write a follow-up email to a client that hasn't responded to our previous message, maybe you have something like compose a gentle, friendly reminder, email to a client who's missed our previous communication, or try something like write a quirky email that is professional but has a hint of humor that hasn't responded to our previous email. And what you'll do is you'll start to understand how these models work and which ways are the best ways to get the most out of them. I think a lot of it like a toddler, right? I have a 5-year-old at home. And so oftentimes if I say, no, you can't have a cookie before breakfast, he's like, screw you. Or the other day I told him we were at T-ball and I said, okay, if when you hit the ball, you have to run all the bases and you run home. And my son was like, well, mommy, that's way too far. And I was like, oh, no, not home, like our home, like home plate in baseball. And so, I think context is so important. So when you communicate, I think the more that you can be more specific and more clear, the better you're going to get out of these tools that you're using. This is the last tip. This is what I'll call is my Mad Libs prompt that I use on a regular basis when I'm trying to get something done through an AI tool. So I usually ask it to take on a certain persona and I input an expert persona there. I'll say write, draft, outline, create, depending on what I'm asking it to do. I am very specific about the format I want it in and length. Sometimes I'll even upload templates that it can use as a reference. I'll provide this is what I'm hoping to achieve. I'll also say, it should include this type of data points or these points of views, which are important so that you can really stand and still maintain your own personal touch or your own fingerprint in the writing. And also don't forget about the tone that you want to achieve. And one thing that I often find it gets missing is who you're writing towards, right? Is this for a coworker? Is this for your boss? Is this for a client? Is this for a friend, right? The tones of the email and how it relates to an emotional or psychological or logical perspective into motivating them into action will differ. And so if you give that kind of context to AI, you'll continue to get better results. So I hope this is helpful for you guys as you get started and continue to utilize different AI tools. And we will be back next week with another AI tip for trailblazers.